Hi colleagues, today I would like to present you again a very interesting topic. I called it, Is FeignClient fine? In this video I would like not just to discuss what is the FeignClient is about. I also would like to touch different REST clients which is available if you are using Spring or Spring Boot. This is our REST template, FeignClient or VM client. I also would like to compare these three different clients. First of all, let us say several words about FeignClient in Spring. Somebody can say the FeignClient is a magic in Spring's world. It's a joke, but nevertheless, FeignClient enables our application to communicate with REST API, and in the program code it looks like as a call of local method of some class. In other words, FeignClient is a declarative REST client for Spring Boot applications. One great thing about using FeignClient is that we don't have to write any code for calling the service, other than an interface definition. Also, the FeignClient concept is not specific for Spring. In different frameworks, we also can find something that looks similar to FeignClient in Spring. The main concept is that there is an interface, and with using interface, we describe which method of REST we are going to call. For example, here in Spring, it would look like following. First of all, we are using FeignClient annotation, for example. And here in interface, we introduce methods which we are going to call. And these methods is mapped to REST API methods. For example, if we can see the find order by ID, here we can see that the corresponding HTTP method is get. The request mapping is equal to /ID. And here is also a path variable ID. And the Java type for this path variable is UUID, or universal unique identifier. Now, let us compare FeignClient and REST template. REST template is a synchronous HTTP client in Spring, is part of Spring for a long time. REST template makes blocking HTTP requests and is highly customizable. You can custom error handlers, interceptors, and message converters. Here we can see an example of using REST template. Here we're just creating an instance of REST template, and here we can find how it's easy to call any API, REST API, with using, for example, get for object method of this REST template. Here, let me clarify the meaning of this phrase. REST template makes blocking HTTP requests. What does it mean, blocking HTTP request? When we are using REST template, each request from REST template is equal to one thread. It means that this request is binded with this platform thread of Java. Why I am using platform thread? Because starting from Java 21, there is also a virtual thread. That's why, for clarity, when I am talking about a simple, usual thread, I am using the phrase platform thread. As I said, each request from REST template is binded to platform thread. And when we send a request, HTTP request, there is some delay because of network, and also there is some delay when we are waiting an answer from our counterparty. And for that period of time, the thread is blocked. This thread does nothing useful. Okay, now let us compare FeignClient with another guy with the name Web Client. Web Client is a part of Spring Web Flux, and Web Flux is a special model of Spring which brings non-blocking operation, not blocking tools to our arsenal. That's why Web Client is not blocking HTTP client, or in other words, reactive HTTP client. Web Client supports synchronous as well as asynchronous communication, but mainly is used for asynchronous communication, and also provides fluent API for creating HTTP requests. For example, here we are creating Web Client with this method factory, and here we are using this fluent API for building a request to this URL. And here we subscribe to a result of this call. Okay, on this slide I have combined all information about these three HTTP clients. And let's say I depict four features: programming style, use cases, performance, and concurrency. And if we would like to compare REST template and web client, we would say that REST template is without Fluent API and is straightforward in the code. Web client has Fluent API, but it's complicated to understand how to use web client from scratch without knowledge of split web flags in common. And our FeignClient is declarative, and as I already said, it's just an interface and let's say very simple correspondence between interface method and HTTP method, and its signatures also. REST template is used in blocking applications. It doesn't mean that these applications are simple, but nevertheless. And new analog is introduced in Spring Boot 3.0. The name is REST Client, and its REST Client is pretty much simpler than REST template. Web client is used in reactive applications. What does it mean, reactive applications? Usually about 30% better performance in comparing with blocking applications. And I would like to recommend you to read more about reactive applications because it's a very interesting topic. And sometimes when you choose some approach how to build your new microservice, sometimes this reactive approach, this web flags model can help you a lot. And if we would like to talk about use cases for FeignClient, we would say that it's used in microservices, especially in Spring Cloud, because there is, let's say, some tools for discovery and for web service registry. And for FeignClient, it's these tools helps FeignClient works, let's say, smoothly. What I would like to say is that SOP calls are also possible with using FeignClient. In general, it doesn't matter. Do you use Spring Cloud or not? Nevertheless, you can use FeignClient. But in Spring Cloud stack, FeignClient looks more, let's say, better. Okay, here we also have another two features. One is performance and another is concurrency. If we would talk about REST template, as I said, REST template is blocking. And the highest performance for one separate request can be achieved with using REST template because one request is equal to one thread. Web client is not blocking. One request is equal to several threads because of this delay when we are waiting a response. Then there is no blocking, there is no thread which is blocked. There is nothing. That's why there can be switch between threads, and the time for that is needed. Performance is okay for one request, but is not the highest for one separate request. But in general, if you use reactive stack from Spring Web Flux, if you use web client, if you use reactive streams, if you use native as a server where you deploy your web service, the performance would be higher, but the code would be more complicated, and this approach requires really a good knowledge of reactive stack from developer. That's why web client cannot be used separately without this all other stuff which I mentioned. And about FeignClient, it's in this, let's say, from performance perspective, it's usually equal to REST template. What we can say about concurrency? One request, one thread in case of REST template, one request, several threads in case of web client, and usually one request, one thread for FeignClient. And as usual, I prepared for you some demo. Without that, it would be an uninteresting video. What I have prepared, let's say it's a project which I called FeignClient. You can find this project on my GitHub. A link for my GitHub you can find at the end of the video. But I would like to say several words now about this project, and would like to make some code review. Here we have three models. One model is called API. In this model, I put, let's say, description of our API or declaration of our API and some data transfer object or DTO or some model. In model impl, I put implementation of our API. And in model client, I put our Feign Client. And there I have shown how is it easy to implement Feign Client and to use it for HTTP calls. Why it's also useful to split the project in the models? Because, for example, if you put just interface in API model, then you can share this API model between other microservices, and these microservices can be easily build a Feign client on their side and call your API, which is implemented in original web service. In our API model, we have just an interface, which is called employee API. Here we have three methods. And here we can understand this method stands for get with this path. This stands for also get, but for this path. And this stands for find all path. I would like to say sorry that I called this path not according to usual approaches of calling resources in REST concept, but I called it so to show you how these Java methods are binded with, let's say, HTTP methods. In our impl model, we have usual REST controller, which implements our employee API interface from API model. And each method returns employee DTO, which also is defined in API model. And it's usual REST controller. And all annotations are also taken from our employee API interface. And eventually, in our client model of our project, we have some configuration which brings new beans to our Spring context. And here only one bean is defined. The name of this bean is employee API. And here we are, with using builder, we are constructing a Feign client with using our employee API interface. Base URL is taken from our property, and just two usual Jackson encoder and decoder for encoding and decoding. And that's all. As this bean is in the context, we can inject this bean to other, let's say, services of Spring, in other beans of Spring. For example, here we have command line runner implementation, and here I have injected our employee API bean via constructor, and I'm calling this find all method, and in its turn, HTTP request will be in place. Okay, colleagues, now it's the end of this video. I would like to say thank you for your attention. If you would like to find the discussed examples, you can find them with using this link on my GitHub or with using this QR code. Once again, thanks a lot. And if you like what I am doing, please subscribe on my YouTube channel. Once again, thanks a lot and bye.